The Johnson family had been looking for a new home for months. They were a middle-class family with 2 young children, and they needed a place that was affordable and spacious enough for their growing family. So when they stumbled upon an old, run-down house on the outskirts of town that was being sold for a fraction of its value, they couldn't resist. The house had been abandoned for years, and it showed. The paint was peeling, the roof was leaky, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. But the Johnsons saw potential in the house, and they knew they could fix it up and make it their own. The real estate agent warned them that the house had a bit of history. Because of the location, it has been on the market for some time, she explained. Although it's no longer in use, the site has an old cemetery. Just a small number of tombs may be found there. The Johnsons shrugged off the warning. They weren't superstitious, and they didn't believe in ghosts. They merely desired a home of their own. The following weeks at the house went smoothly. They spent their days unpacking boxes and painting walls, and their nights were filled with the sounds of crickets and the wind rustling through the trees. But then, things started to change. One night, Mrs. Johnson woke up to the sound of someone whispering her name. She sat up in bed, her heart racing, and took a quick look around. But there was no one there. She shook her husband awake, but he was groggy and didn't hear anything. The next night, Mr. Johnson woke up to the sound of footsteps outside their bedroom window. He got out of bed and looked outside, but there was no one there. He shrugged it off, assuming it was just a stray animal, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The following few days saw the beginning of weird events. Doors would open and close on their own, objects would move without explanation, and the air in the house seemed to grow thick and heavy. The Johnsons started to feel uneasy, and they began to regret their decision to buy the house. But they had invested so much time and money into the renovations, and they couldn't afford to move again. One day, while the Johnsons were working in the yard, they stumbled upon an old gravestone that had been buried under years of dirt and leaves. They dug it up and read the inscription, "Here lies Martha Thompson, beloved wife and mother. Died June 23rd, 1865. They were shocked. They had no idea that the cemetery was so old, and they had never heard of Martha Thompson before. They decided to do some research on the cemetery, and what they found was horrifying. The cemetery had been used in the early 1800s for the burial of slaves and Native Americans who had been forced to work on the nearby plantation. A vengeful medicine woman whom the plantation owner had tortured and killed for engaging in witchcraft had cursed the land. She had vowed to haunt the land and seek revenge on the descendants of the plantation owner for all eternity. The Johnsons were terrified. They had unwittingly moved onto cursed land, and they didn't know what to do. They tried to sell the house, but no one wanted to buy it. They tried to ignore the strange occurrences, but they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One night, while they were all sound asleep, they heard someone banging on the front door. Mr. Johnson got up to answer it, but no one was there when he opened the door. He peered out into the pitch blackness, but he saw nothing. He dismissed it as a prank and went back to bed. But then they heard the laughter. It was a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the house. They all sat up in bed, paralyzed with fear. The laughter grew louder and louder, and then it stopped. The silence was even more terrifying than the laughter. Suddenly they heard footsteps outside their bedroom door. Even though the doorknob was turned, it was locked. They heard a low growling sound, and then it was gone. The Johnsons knew they couldn't stay in the house any longer. They gathered their things and fled into the night, never looking back. Years later, the house remained abandoned. People said that strange things still happened there, and that the laughter and growling could still be heard on quiet nights. The Johnsons had learned the hard way that some things are best left undisturbed, and that the past can come back to haunt you in the most terrifying ways imaginable. The man had always known he was an only child, but one day, while rummaging through the attic of his childhood home, he stumbled upon a dusty old box. Inside, he found a reel of 16 mm film that he had never seen before. As he watched the film, his life was forever changed. The film showed a family picnic from many years ago, and as he watched, he realized that there was a boy in the film whom he had never seen before. The boy was about his age and looked just like him. He couldn't believe it. He had a brother. The man was shocked and confused. How could he not remember having a brother? He searched through his old photo albums and found no evidence of the boy. He may as well not have been there at all. Determined to learn the truth, the man began to investigate. He went to his parents and asked about the boy in the film. They told him that he had a brother who died when he was just a child. They had never told him about it because they didn't want to upset him, but the man wasn't satisfied with their answer. He knew there was more to the story than they were letting on. He kept digging and eventually found an old newspaper article about a child who had gone missing in the woods near their home many years ago. The article described a boy who looked just like him. The man's heart raced as he realized the truth. He had a twin brother who had been lost in the woods and never found. The realization sent shivers down his spine. As he continued to research, he discovered more and more about his brother's disappearance. The woods were known to be haunted, and many people believed that there was an evil spirit that lived there. The more he learned, the more he became convinced that his brother's disappearance was not an accident. One night, while he was sleeping, the man had a vivid dream. In the dream, he was walking through the woods, and he could feel a presence following him. He turned around and saw a ghostly figure that looked just like his brother. The figure beckoned him to follow, and he did. The figure led him deep into the woods, and he could feel the evil presence growing stronger. He realized that he was in danger and tried to turn back, but it was too late. The figure disappeared, and he was alone in the darkness. Suddenly, he heard a sound behind him. He turned around and saw the ghostly figure again, but this time it was different. It was no longer his brother. It was a twisted, evil version of him, with glowing red eyes and sharp teeth. The man tried to run, but he was paralyzed with fear. The evil figure closed in on him, and he knew that he was going to die. Just as the figure was about to strike, he woke up, gasping for breath. The man never found out what really happened to his brother, but he knew that he was never going to forget the terrifying experience. From that day on, he couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were calling to him and that his brother's spirit was still trapped there, waiting for him to come and join him. As soon as the family moved into the old house, they knew something was off. They couldn't quite put their finger on it, but the creaks and groans of the old structure seemed to be more than just a sign of aging. They ignored it at first, chalking it up to their imagination, but as the weeks went by, things began to escalate. At first, it was just little things. Objects would be moved from their usual places, and doors would be left open that they were sure they had closed. They blamed each other, each assuming it was one of the others who had forgotten or been careless. But then they started hearing noises coming from the attic. It started with a soft rustling, like something was moving around up there. They assumed it was just some mice or squirrels, but as time went on, the noises got louder and more frequent. They sounded like footsteps, but heavier, as if someone or something was pacing back and forth. One night, the family was all sitting in the living room watching TV when they heard a loud thump coming from above them. They all froze, staring up at the ceiling as the sound echoed through the house. They waited, holding their breath, but there was no other noise. The father, feeling brave, grabbed a flashlight and headed up to the attic to investigate. The rest of the family huddled together nervously, waiting for him to come back down. After what felt like an eternity, they heard him calling out from upstairs. "Hey guys, you've got to come see this," he called down to them. They all looked at each other, hesitant to leave the safety of the living room, but their curiosity got the best of them. Slowly, they made their way up the stairs to the attic. As they stepped onto the dusty floor, they saw what their father had found. In the corner of the attic, there was a pile of old blankets and pillows, and lying on top of them was a small, pale figure. It was a child, no more than 6 years old, dressed in ragged clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. The child looked up at them with big, wide eyes, and the family could see that there was something wrong with it. The child's skin was unnaturally pale, and its hair was thin and stringy. But it wasn't just their appearance that was unsettling. There was something about the eyes, a look of pure terror that made the family's skin crawl. As they tried to approach the child, they heard a loud hiss, and the child started to back away from them, cowering in fear. Suddenly, the family heard more movement in the attic, and they realized that the child was not alone up there. There was something else with them, something that had been living and moving up in the attic with them all along. They turned to run, but the door at the bottom of the stairs was stuck, and they couldn't get it to budge. They were trapped with whatever was living up in the attic with them. The family huddled together, waiting for whatever was up there to make its next move, wondering if they would ever make it out alive. The sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand woke me up. I fumble for it, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a text message from an unknown number. "I'm watching you," it reads. My hands shake as I type out a response, asking who they are and what they want. But I don't get a reply, just silence. I have received similar messages before. After breaking up with my abusive ex-boyfriend, I've been getting threatening emails and texts. I've changed my number and blocked him on social media, but somehow he still manages to find me. I tried to shake off the fear and go back to sleep, but it was no use. Every creak and whisper in the darkness sets my nerves on edge. I keep the lights on, but the shadows seem to grow longer and darker. The next day, I go to the police station and file a report. They take my statement and tell me they'll keep an eye out, but I know they can't do much without any concrete evidence. The days blur together in a haze of anxiety and fear. I jump at every unexpected noise, and every stranger on the street seems to be him in disguise. One night, as I'm walking home from work, I hear footsteps behind me. When I turned around, I saw no one there. I started to walk faster, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps got louder and closer. I break into a run, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I have no idea where I'm going, but I know I have to get away from here. And then suddenly, the footsteps stop. I turn around, panting and sweating, but there's no one there. Just an empty street, the night sky above. I was engulfed in fear. He's out there, somewhere, watching me, waiting for his chance to strike. I started to carry pepper spray with me everywhere I went, but it was poor comfort. I know that if he wants to hurt me, a can of spray won't do much to stop him. And then one night, I came home to find my front door open. My heart in my throat, I creep inside, praying that he's not there. But as I walk into the living room, I see him sitting on my couch, a smile on his face. He doesn't say anything. He just stares at me with those cold, dead eyes. I try to run, but he grabs me, his grip like iron, and then suddenly I woke up. It was just a nightmare. But as I lay there in bed, shaking and sweating, I couldn't help but wonder if it was a premonition, a warning of what's to come. The fear never goes away. Always there, it waits patiently in the shadows for its opportunity to strike. But I won't give in to its power over me. I'll keep fighting and pushing back against the darkness, no matter what horrors lie in wait. The smell of the old, musty church filled the air as Rebecca stepped through the doors. She had been searching for a place to write her horror stories away from prying eyes, and this small chapel seemed like the perfect place to do it. Little did Rebecca know that she would soon be dealing with something far more sinister than her creative works. Rebecca sat down in the pew, her pen and paper in hand. She began to write, her mind filled with visions of the macabre. But as she wrote, she heard a noise. She heard it, although it was really low. It sounded like chanting coming from somewhere outside the church. Rebecca froze in fear. She had an inkling that the chanting was coming from a religious group of some sort, and she had heard stories about such groups being hostile to people like her who wrote horror stories. She packed her belongings hurriedly and headed towards the door. Just as she reached the door, it flew open, and a group of people wearing white robes and carrying crosses came rushing in. The chanting became louder, and Rebecca realized that a group of religious fanatics were about to confront her. Rebecca was terrified. She could feel the anger and hatred from the group, and she prayed that they would just leave her alone. But the group advanced on her, their eyes blazing with rage and their hands gripping their crosses tightly. Rebecca tried to reason with them, but the group would not listen. They accused her of being an immoral person, and they threatened to burn her books and writings if she did not stop her evil ways. The group's leader, a man with a wild, fanatical look in his eyes, stepped forward and declared that Rebecca was going to be judged. Rebecca was desperate. She needed to get away from this group before they did something horrible to her. She looked around the church and noticed a window that had been left open. She quickly jumped through it and ran as fast as she could. Rebecca ran for what seemed like hours before reaching safety. She was relieved, but her heart was still pounding from the terror she had experienced. She had narrowly escaped a dangerous situation, and she was thankful. But little did Rebecca know that the group of religious fanatics was still out there, and they were determined to find her and make her pay for her sins against their beliefs. Rebecca would never be able to write her horror stories again without thinking of the danger she was in. She was certain that the group would never stop searching for